All right, we should be live.
And we are, yeah. The timer's going off.
Oh, sweet. All right, hold on. Before we get started, both John and I are going to share the live stream on our... Oh, sweet. Nice. The live stream. Okay. It's got a thumbs up already. Awesome.
We won't let you down, person who preemptively thumbed up. So, reading any interesting books of late?
Right now, I'm reading. Okay, I just posted. Oh wait, no, that's not that. Sorry, I gotta delete that one.
It's all good.
Oh wait, no, that's not that.
We are currently experiencing some technical issues, folks. Please stand by.
It's all good. Nothing to see here. Not. I mean, plenty to see here. I mean, this is what you should be watching.
Exactly.
All
Get
right.
off of whatever else you're doing. So, what book did you say you were reading?
Oh, right now I'm reading. It's okay. All right, we are good. Okay, let's get back to the studio. Okay, good. Oh, we got one person watching. Hi. And for those who don't know, this jersey is a Russian Continental Hockey League jersey, KHLC. K, an H, an X is an H in Russian. And that's L there. It's like a lambda from the Greek. So, потому что мой друг дай меня jersey. I looked up the word for jersey in Russian. It was да, моя семья из Саратова на Волге. Well, anyway, I'm going to take this off. There's the no.
All right. And while Alan is taking his jersey off, we welcome you. We're having a discussion today on Justification. It's currently something I'm looking at. And
yeah. Okay, you wanted to know what I'm reading. Oh, we got 5-day productions. Good to see you guys. It's past. Where are you 5 a day? If it's past 4 a.m. But the book I'm reading is the Alexiad by a lady by the name of Anna Komnene. Now, she lived in the 12th century. She was the princess of the Byzantine Empire. Her father was Alexius Comnenus. Mm-hmm. And she basically wrote a biography of her dad. It's called the Alexiad, trying to use the theme like Homer's Iliad. And so this is the biography of Alexius Comnenus. Now, another thing that's important about this book, it's a primary source of the Crusades. Because keep in mind, he's the guy who asked the Pope to call the Crusades. Alexius Comnenus. Now, and so this is a Byzantine account of the Crusades. I'm not at that part yet. I'm about 10% through. But I'll say this much. Reading this is like reading a real version of Game of Thrones. It's kind of like, palace intrigue always going on, wars, politics.
Although you're probably seeing less boobs in that book, I'm willing to bet.
I was comparing it to the books, not the show.
Yeah, but the show is what people think about. You
watched the show, John? Ooh.
I've never actually watched the show, nor have I read the books.
Oh, okay.
So my virgin eyes are protected.
I hope so. All right,
I'm hearing some feedback from you. Do you have any headphones?
I do.
All right. Well, Alan goes and gets headphones. No, I'm not going to steal the show again.
Okay. Maybe we should have been a bit more organized.
Just a tad. But it's all coming together, folks. Don't worry.
Okay. Now, I don't want this to turn into my microphone. That's what I'm worried about. Okay. headphone jacks are on that side. Nothing to see here, folks.
Yeah.
Okay, for all the people listening, can you hear us? Does that sound better, John?
Let me see. Test. Yeah, I can't hear any echo. You're good.
Hi. Okay. Yeah, because like sometimes you speak and then my microphone will pick it up. I probably should move this further away, but
it's all good.
Okay, that's the cam. This is the audio. Okay, yeah, because I just want to know. Okay. Okay, I just want to know, the people in the chat, can you hear me with these on? I've only got 2 people in the chat.
All right, 5 a day from the UK. What's your opinion on this?
Can you hear me? 5 a day?
He probably stepped off to get some snacks.
Okay, I think we're good, actually, because I just looked at the... Okay, so I am joined. I'm Al, or Alan, either way. I'm joined with John Fisher 2.0, who a few months ago, he had a debate with Father James about the papal document Apostolicae Curae, which says Anglican orders are null and void.
Absolutely null and utterly void. We have to emphasize that every time. Yeah. I have to, at least.
There you go. So they're null and void, absolutely null and utterly void. So, and then after that, he put a poll out. He's like, well, I think I'm as far as I can on this. And he put a poll out with 4 topics. I remember one was justification. That's the one I voted for. One was papal infallibility. I didn't vote for that one because I'm like, we've got a lot of good apologists who know how to defend that. I'm not saying we can't use more, but I'm saying I think we're lacking more in this area. What were 3 and 4, John, if you can recall offhand?
Let's see. Okay, so I can't really recall them offhand, unfortunately. Let's see. I think one was against Mormons, and the other was, I don't know, something against the Jehovah's Witnesses, like minor groups no one really cares about.
Yeah, like we don't like. I mean, well, I guess Catholics have converted to those faiths, but I mean, we're probably hurting more in the Protestant area of justification. I mean, unless you live in Utah, and most Catholics in the world don't. There's a couple Utah Catholics I follow on Twitter. There's Ave Cristo Rey, and there's that pro-life girl. I know she's an ex-Mormon. What's her name? Is that Kay? Kay, shout out to Kay if you're watching this. So yeah. I don't know if she's in Utah. I just know she's an ex-Mormon. So
pretty good bet, though.
Yeah, yeah, quite possibly. And so the point is, I voted for justification, and justification won. So John has taken it upon himself to study this important doctrine. It's a very important doctrine. If you taught the Protestants, they say the church stands or falls on this doctrine. Now, of course, they say that, of course, but we know that this doctrine, the Catholics have a different view of this. And so I suppose my first question for you, John, is why is this an important topic?
Well, for a variety of reasons. Some Protestants have said that this is the doctrine which the Reformation stands or falls. So if you really bring down justification, that is most of the Protestant Reformation right there. although I think Father James would probably say no, because Anglicanism is like a very strange creature. But when I say Protestantism, I just mean the Continental Reformation. The English Reformation is weird enough, so I don't just
Yeah.
go with the full-on thing with that. But basically the Lutheran Reformation, the Lutheran Reformation, the Genevan Reformation, those are basically down the hatch. In terms of Anabaptists, they're pretty much in the same boat. And of course, because the Baptists spring there, they're basically going to fall as well. So if you bring down justification, that is a huge hole you're putting in the enemy arsenal, if what we say is accurate. Now, what's fairly interesting about justification is it actually ties in very heavily with their assault against the sacrifice of the Mass, because if you read a lot of early attacks on the Mass, basically a huge problem with it was justification didn't just go on once and done. Rather, justification happened continuously. You were justified from your venial sins by appeasing the wrath of God in the sacrifice of the Mass. Every time the Mass happens, Christ's one sacrifice is represented to us, and we take it onto ourselves. God's wrath is appeased, and our venial sins are no longer going to cause us punishment, temporal punishments, mind you, against our own soul. So one of the big reasons why a lot of the Protestants attacked the sacrifice of the Mass was because it was in such contention with the doctrine of justification by faith alone. And if you read a lot of the English reformers who did hold on to this doctrine of justification, that was one of their big reasons for rejecting it as well. So, so that's why it's very important.
Which English Protestants are you talking about specifically?
Let's see. Cranmer is probably the biggest example of this, and I'm trying to remember who else. And as well as Ridley. Those would be examples of reformers who thought it was in great contention. In fact, if you look at the 39 Articles, one of the things they stress is the fact that Christ's sacrifice was one and done. And that's why the Mass is considered to be a huge insult. The same thing can be said about the homilies of Bishop Jewell. He also says that because justification is this one-time thing, we don't even need any. John Jewell. We don't even need any real priests. So, yeah, it's something that affects the totality of the Reformation. Yeah,
it's a bit ironic.
Exactly. So that's actually why Anglicans still maintain that there was many Anglicans still maintain there was still jurisdiction being passed down via apostolic succession, not because they didn't believe in apostolic succession or because bishops had the power to ordain and make and bring others to the office. It's just that they didn't believe the office of the bishop and the office of the priest were sacrificial offices. So when they say bishop and priest, it's a little like how communist countries say that they're democratic republics. Like North Korea can say it's the Democratic People's Republic of North Korea, but they're using democratic in a very loose sense. In the same way East Germany said they were a democratic republic. The one country that called itself democratic really wasn't. Likewise, the English calling themselves priest, it was more or less a term that was fairly empty.
Okay. So, I mean, when we, do you think that, okay, we're Catholics who live in 2021. We talk with Protestants who live in 2021. Do you think that it's just as big an issue as it was in, say, maybe not 1521, but say 16, 17, 18, 21? Is this going to be a sticky issue with the Protestants as much as it is today?
Yeah, but for very different reasons, because Protestants are not well informed on their theology. But to be fair, Catholics are also not well informed on their theology. True. So if you talk to a Protestant about what's wrong with like Catholic soteriology about how we're saved, they'll say, "Oh, you believe that you have to work for salvation, that you have to believe, but you also have to do the works, and when you do the works and when you believe, you're justified." Well, like that's not the Catholic position. Like the Catholic position is justification is the remission of sins. You come to faith by God providing what's called actual grace. Actual grace disposes you to overcome the depravity of original sin. It enables you to, in some way, there's actually a bit of a dispute on this one, enables you to, in some way, to achieve what's called sanctifying grace. And when sanctifying grace is given to you, and it's usually done through baptism as the mechanism,
Yeah.
as the instrumental cause, your faith turns alive. It's no longer a dead faith like that of the catechumens, but rather it's a living faith infused with the theological virtues of charity or love in the modern English, and hope. So love, hope, and faith are the three theological virtues. The other two bring faith alive, and hence you are sanctified. And because, and hence you are justified before God. And it is that state of justification where the grace is infused that puts you in that state.
So, slightly off topic, but very closely related. Who do you think is the best Protestant apologist? And it does not have to be contemporary, but who do you think defends this doctrine the best?
I can't say he defends it the best, but I'll definitely say he explains it the best from the Protestant perspective. And I've learned a lot from watching his videos. Dr. Jordan B. Cooper, he's actually really good in terms of communication. He breaks things down in a very simple to understand and digest way. He's actually doing critiques of very well-informed Roman Catholic apologists. Well, not apologists.
Yeah, he is.
Recently, Robert Koons, who's more of a philosopher than a theologian, but he's right now going through a bit of a review on his book of Justification, and he's coming to some sharp disagreements with Koons. I've listened enough where I can understand his perspective, but not enough where I can recite and debate it. But I'd say if I say I was pretty much done with Justification and I knew I didn't really have to do any more of a delve into the topic, and I had to debate, if I could debate Jordan B. Cooper and actually hold my own, I'd be like, I know this well enough where I'm comfortable with it and I can say it's a reasonable opinion, if at the very least. It's pretty much how I felt about debating James the second time. As soon as I learned more about Anglican orders, and of course past ordinals in church history, at a certain point I was like, oh, okay, I get where he's coming from and I see how he holds his opinion, but I'm very comfortable holding the Catholic opinion, and I don't think rejecting it would be reasonable. And that's basically the position I'd want to come to. Now, to be fair, I haven't really read James White on this, and he might be a little better, but I'm going to have to steep myself more into the Catholic stuff first, and especially Scripture, before I can do that.
Okay, so what scriptures do you think are like specifically what text? Obviously, all Scripture is important, but that specifically deals with this issue.
Let's see. Well, usually the best ones are found in the books of Galatians and Romans, but actually a very good one that's kind of overlooked is in John chapter 6, verse 4. And Thomas Aquinas actually makes this point very, very well. He quotes, "Everyone who hath heard of the Father and hath learned comes to me," and quote, "now to learn," comes to me, and to learn cannot be without a movement of free will, since the learner ascends to the teacher. Hence, no one comes to the Father by justifying grace without a movement of free will. So basically, one argument that he's really hammering in is the Father is someone who teaches the doctrine, and someone has to ascend to that. Now, if that's the case, if you have to have an intellectual assent of faith, and that requires a movement of free will, then that means there's some kind of ontological change going on underneath. At least that's Aquinas' psychological view of the matter, and I think it actually kind of shows that there is something going on internally with us, and it's not just a matter of how Protestants would like to say, as a matter of a forensic declaration that God considers you just because Christ himself died on the cross for you, and his righteousness is now going to be considered as your own righteousness. So that would probably be one scripture verse I haven't really heard talked about too often, that I think actually makes a pretty good defense, at least initially.
Does Martin Luther ever? Have you read much of Martin Luther on
I have not.
Justification? Oh, okay.
I have not. Just secondary sources. I've gone through. I'm going through the Augsburg. I'm going through the Augsburg's Confession. I know I butchered that pronunciation. And
The Augsburg Confession.
Augsburg. Thank you. And
my dad's a Lutheran, so
that
and that's another reason why this is important to me, by the way, because I mean, although my dad is lapsed and doesn't go to church, his parents, my grandparents, both died as practicing Lutherans. My cousin is a Lutheran. His dad is my brother, but he got married to a girl in some other Protestant church, and so he went there. And yeah, so like my mom is Ukrainian Greek Catholic, and my dad is Lutheran. So Catholic and Lutheran are the two views that I think are the most important. Do you think there's a big difference between how it's viewed among certain types of Protestants? Do the Calvinist view different than the Lutherans, or
there are subtle different? There are actually subtle differences, and it's kind of nice to pick them out. So Cooper actually goes through this between the Reformed view of forensic justification and the Lutheran view of justification. So one is that faith for Lutherans is considered the universal instrumental cause, meaning that anyone who is going to be saved and is going to be justified is going to have faith, even the babies. Whereas for Lutherans, whereas for Calvinists, because they don't believe in baptismal regeneration, they don't believe it's anything other than an external signifier that a child has been welcomed into the covenant, then really no different than like receiving circumcision in the old covenant for us. Then what would essentially happen is nothing until they grow up. Now, that doesn't mean certain infants aren't part of the elect. They are, but they wouldn't be part of the elect by faith. They would just be part of the elect by God's fiat. Whereas for Lutherans, no, you have to be baptized as an infant. Baptism provides regeneration. If you are not baptized, you are not regenerates. And hence, for Lutherans, baptism is something that gives all children faith. And they cite a particular verse from the Psalms in light of it. I forget it off the top of my head, but that would just be an example off the top of my head about some of the subtle differences between the Lutheran camp and the Reformed camp.
Interesting. Yeah, because I mean, both the Lutherans and the Calvinists are considered monergist, meaning that there is one party involved in salvation.
Right.
Just a quick question here from 5-Day Production. Have you read Jamie Akin's book on the topic of justification?
I have not. No. Right now, I'm really trying to hammer down Aquinas' view of soteriology, and I'm actually working on my the Summa right there. Right now, I'm actually doing two things. I'm working on not just a Catholic defense of justification, but a Thomistic one. So I want to actually get Thomas Aquinas' view on justification first, do a lot of preliminary studies on that, on Thomistic philosophy and theology in general, because you have to actually look at Thomas as a very systematic thinker overall, and then you have to look at justification. And from there, I want to actually do a comparison with the Lutheran view and then some of the other Protestant viewpoints as well. Which is why I'm actually working on his on working on his commentary in Galatians, which actually provides a good basis of a response for Lutherans who bring up the book of Romans and the book of Galatians as kind of being proof for salvation by faith alone, or justification by faith alone as a form of imputed righteousness.
So, why do you think Martin Luther came across this doctrine? And well, I suppose it's more of a historical question, but I mean, was there a precedent in the first three quarters of the church where there's some fathers or maybe some medievals who taught a doctrine like this that Martin Luther taught?
Right. So a lot of Catholics who actually write about this issue, and I haven't verified it from the primary sources myself, but they'll say it's actually due to Luther's education amongst nominalists. Nominalists are people. Yep. Nominalists are those who are anti-realists about universals and try to keep their metaphysics as simple as possible. If I had to quote somebody to give a good description, it would be Quine, who is an analytic atheist philosopher. He said he prefers his metaphysics like he likes his metaphysics like he likes deserts, bare and without any or minimal entities. So nominalists are kind of like this. They don't like ideas of universal forms. They don't like this idea of some kind of catness that all these cats are sharing, either in this third or transcendentally in the mind of God, or in his intellect, or in some kind of outer heaven. Nor do they like this metaphysical catness that inheres in some way in all cats. They like a metaphysic where, look,
did Quine use that analogy?
Yeah, he used some kind of. I'm paraphrasing heavily, but he did use an analogy about him liking a very simple metaphysic. Which is funny because this is a guy who was also a mathematical Platonist. So make of that what you like.
Smart guy, though. I mean, you have to you have to give credit where that's due. I mean, if you're studying cognitive science, I mean, him, Chomsky, Skinner, behaviorism. Okay, we're getting off topic here, yeah.
I'll just bring this back to Martin Luther. So according to these Catholic sources, Martin Luther, pretty much influenced by nominalism, he didn't like this idea of these these metaphysical powers at work, and they just preferred a bare understanding. It's rather than understanding grace as some creature that resides in us, and I'm purposely strawmanning here, rather than having grace as this undetectable force that's within us in our psychology and in our soul, they would much prefer to think of it in, God just declaring it, like God saying so and it is done, much like a legal fiction, and which isn't bad. I think William Lane Craigie actually defends a conception of the atonement theory as a legal fiction, but I digress. And it's because of this that Luther just tends towards this view, because he has that's kind of his metaphysical education, but in terms of his motive, you kind of get this from reading both sources. It's because the idea of being in a state of damnation and, just having like a sword of Damocles over your head. Is my conscience working properly? Do I really have a good evaluation of where I am in terms of having a state of sin or a state of blessedness? I need some certainty that I am going about things right. Basically, it was much easier to affirm that you just had faith, because that's more or less an act of a mental assent and some evaluation maybe of your works as kind of a verification. And then to say, okay, no, I'm good. I'm certain enough. I'm good. I can take a deep breather, and I can rest assured in the certainty that I, having faith, am justified by God as my judge who has declared me righteous. So that's kind of the motivation here, his personal psychology. And even Cooper said in one of his videos something along the lines of, if Martin Luther was alive today, he'd probably be diagnosed with major depression, which I think is a probable reading. And then again, if you have that motivation and you also have a very simplistic metaphysics to work with, Yeah, I think that's going to explain how this view comes about. Now, this doesn't mean it's wrong or right. It just means that's kind of the origin with Luther on this particular doctrine. In terms of early church citations, um, you, people cite Augustine, Ambrose. I I haven't checked on the patristic sources to verify this, but yeah, here's the thing. A lot of them in the early church, you find all sides just trying to quote mine church fathers and score patristic points. So I don't usually try to get impressed with just seeing one patristics quote taken from context. You really have to look at it like in its fuller context.
Yeah, I'm
So
not gonna name names, Thomas Odin, but so now you touched on something here that I might that I want to follow up on. It's a more academic Protestant critique, not the layman critique, but they'll say the words are mistranslated. The words justificare is more about being made righteous than being declared righteous. So explain that argument.
Right. So a lot of them claim that the issues were the medievals had this huge problem with the original Greek sources, and because they had a problem with the original Greek sources, what would take place is the medievals would just study the Vulgate. They wouldn't study the Greek text. They would understand justification as, and through their Aristotelian lens, they would understand justification as being this very innate thing, rather than being this state of declaration where somebody is just declared righteous, like God says it and there it's done. And like just off the top of my head, I have a few issues with that. One, you could say that about Augustine, but Saint Jerome was someone who was very fluent in multiple languages, and he wasn't afraid to call out Augustine when he thought he was wrong. So
Well,
just from
wasn't Saint Ambrose fluent in Greek too? And same with wasn't Pope Gregory the Great? He was the papal envoy to Constantinople earlier in his life. I know he's post Augustine, but
right.
he would obviously be he never came to this conclusion. In fact, most Protestants, like James White, accuse Gregory of being a semi-Pelagian.
Yeah,
which is absurd.
Yeah, I couldn't speak to what James White is doing with Saint Gregory, but all I can say is Saint Gregory is somebody who has been canonized a saint by the church. He's been recognized as a saint. That's actually another thing I have. I refuse to believe that the church can be so wrong about a very integral issue, which apparently the Reformation is saying stands or falls with this very issue for all the centuries. It's really tough to believe that God would have allowed things to get that messed up for that long. One would think that, I could understand if God was to allow something like indulgences to take place for such a long time, and at the very least, it doesn't touch on the doctrines. Like surface level abuses, I can understand. But the issue is when you make these integral teachings of the church for so long in very important things like councils, for starters, and in your fathers, like the burden of proof at least builds up there. And if I can also just mention one more thing about that line of argumentation,
Yeah.
A declaration of righteousness is never preclusive from, a declaration of righteousness does not preclude being made righteous. Those, while they're two different things in terms of your conceptualization of it, sometimes God just declares something righteous, which is righteous. So that doesn't help either.
That's true. I've always kind of thought that myself.
Yeah,
I mean, if you're made righteous, aren't you declared righteous de facto? God sees that you're right. Yeah, I know it's a bad argument, but yeah, they still make it, but so you got to deal with it. And it's one of the more intelligent arguments. No, this is, and yeah, like the fact that God allowed the church to be so wrong on something that's not cosmetic. The church stands or falls on this.
Mm-hmm.
according to them anyway.
Right.
Or as I like to say, their church stands or falls in it, and it falls. Spoiler alert! Ooh,
Ooh.
But AKA become Catholic, everyone. So
Right. And yeah, so that would probably be yeah, I think that would probably be a good start of an objection, although I doubt that's going to be the final word. Theologians have a tendency to go back and forth on these issues, but hopefully over time you find a firm enough defeater where enough people are convinced otherwise.
so
That's the hope.
so I've kind of got my theory on this. Martin Luther, they have found notes he made on the Book of Romans in the early 1500s, pre 1517, and that they found out that he was essentially flirting with this doctrine before he put his thesis on the door of the castle church. Ryan Grant talks about this stuff. So does Carl Truman, who's a Protestant historian I admire, who's very fair and balanced. I would, his YouTube videos are great. He's got like a 10-part one on the Reformation. But when do you think he really publicly promotes this doctrine? Like, he's believed it for some time, but when and why does he come open with it?
Well, here's the thing. At the very end of the day, he's a reformer. Like, that was his original goal. He wanted to reform the church for the better. And you know what? Sometimes you have to take people at their word on it. And sometimes you get a little carried away in your antics. In fact, even reformers who remained in the church but were still heretics, like Erasmus, who didn't, like Erasmus didn't even believe that at one point you needed to confess to a priest. And he was almost, what was it? He was almost handed the cardinal's hat, despite the fact that he was, writing here.
Yeah, is that Pope Paul the III?
This is what I read in. I believe it was. I'm trying to remember their names. I think it's either Cisco or Salza. One of them mentioned it in their review in their talk against sedevacantism.
Like Erasmus, smart guy, but I mean, he kind of reminds me of Pope Benedict XVI. Smart guy, but at the end of it, the day, his mind is gone. He's not promoting the true faith. But absolutely brilliant.
Out of curiosity, I wouldn't actually. Out of curiosity, in terms of like his senility with his, more heretical views, are you saying that they're kind of aligning at the end of his life, that they take off, or do you think that he actually still held, these heretical views early on when his mind was still good?
Are we talking about Erasmus or Luther?
Yes. No, Erasmus.
See, I don't really have a good timeline on Erasmus's life. I must confess, I've not studied his life in depth, but he dies in 1535, right?
Right.
He dies a Catholic. He's not canonized for some of the reasons we've gone over. He critiques Martin Luther's book Against Free Will.
On Bondage of the Will.
The Bondage of the Will. Yeah, that was Martin Luther's big book, where he just really goes after free will. This in the mid 1520s. And I think that was a response to Erasmus's book. And I think Erasmus actually wrote a response, but I don't think it gained much traction. I've actually got a book. It's got them both bound together. It's over there somewhere. But it's The Freedom of the Will, then Martin Luther's reply, The Bondage of the Will. I'm not I know that Erasmus was close friends with Thomas More. I know he had been in England for a while.
Him and More hung out in the same humanist circles. And the humanist circles, by the way, were the ones who were saying, we need to return back to the classics, like classical Latin and Greek and all these older languages. Although, to be fair, there were people who who did that too, but didn't fall into heresies. Like Cardinal Bellarmine was really adept at languages. He wrote about Cicero like when he was 5. He wrote poems like Cicero when he was 5, or at a really young age. On top of that, this is a guy who wrote the first book in Europe at the time to help people learn Hebrew. And he taught a class where he didn't know Greek at the beginning, and then he learned one class ahead of all his students. Like, that is amazeballs. At least this is what all Ryan Grant tells me in that a couple of interviews I've listened to him.
Yeah, I've got to have Ryan Grant on my show for a live stream. Like each time, like I'm doing like historical research, I'll like screenshot the thing on the phone on Amazon. I'll post, "Yo, Ryan, is this good? Yeah, that's a good book." Smart guy, Ryan Grant. And he's the person to have on if you want to learn about Erasmus, because I mean, like that whole period, he knows like the back of his hand.
Although
the thing I'm trying to do with the Crusades, which is why I'm reading Anna Komnina's book.
Just something else to bring up, though, just to get a little away from Erasmus. So, like Martin Luther, he was legit trying to reform the church. And I think the reason why justification, in the sense that he understood it, was brought up was it kind of undercuts a lot of the indulgence system, which he railed against. Now, indulgences are not intrinsically a bad thing. What was bad about indulgences were the church was people in the church saying, this indulgence will get you X amount of time off of purgatory if you take it. And it was basically an act of simony. They were selling it where you're not supposed to sell holy things. People, if they give money towards the church as a form of charity, then that's considered an indulgence, not because they bought the indulgence, but because they acted charitably. And the indulgence was something as a side effect or as a consequence of that charity. Think of it like this: if I donate to a charity that happens to give a free shirt with every $50, and I take the shirt, doesn't mean I didn't act charitably. It just means that, hey, I acted charitably. Here's a shirt. That's how I would analogize it, unless you don't think that's helpful.
Well, and that's true. No, that's perfect. And there's a lot of misconceptions about the role indulgences played. Like, for example, when Frederick of Saxony, who was a guy who kind of protected Luther, but never met him, and historians don't know why to this day. They have speculations, but that's all they are. But it's not, when he said to Tetzel, you can't come into Saxony, that was not to that's not that he was against indulgences, because he had like 10,000 relics that he had, and all of that had various indulgences attached to them. And he didn't want any competition. Like, he didn't want Tetzel, coming in, because his relics were a source of revenue, essentially. So there's a lot of misconceptions about that, about this, how this protector Martin Luther didn't allow Tetzel to come in. But, and of course, for those who don't know, Tetzel was the Dominican who was preaching indulgences in the who's partly responsible for the abuse of indulgences. Because let's face it, there were abuses, and that's the string that Martin Luther attached on. So, okay, we're slightly getting off topic here.
But just to take it back, if this corrupt indulgence system was to have a means of being undercut by saying, yeah, there is no necessity of receiving grace over and over and over again by as a means of getting rid of your venial sins. Rather, you're justified. It's one and done. You are justified in God through faith. While you must maintain your faith, The indulgence system is not going to help you do that. Just maintain your faith and you are good with God. Like Luther's system is, in my opinion, just a systematic alternative where it's trying to stop both indulgences from creeping back in, and it's also supposed to stop um, any kind of level of uncertainty that could lead someone to despair or be uneasy with their potential salvation. Now, to be fair, this isn't my opinion that's been thought out by rampant research. This is my most charitable reading of Martin Luther at this point, and that's all it is. So I've always tried to approach anyone I disagree with the greatest amount of charity, and if they disappoint me, well, they disappoint me. But at the very least, I can't be said to be outright bigoted against them from the get-go.
Yeah, no, and I think most of the people that promote this, like you talked about Dr. Jordan Cooper, he's a very goodwill guy. I think he'd have a conversation with you on this. Maybe when you're a bit more read up, I could arrange a debate between you two.
That's going to take a while, but hopefully.
Well, no, I do recall him saying, now that you think about it, he does not like to do debates. He's more into a dialogue style.
I'd be really happy to if and when my channel picks up to have him on for a discussion. That'd be pretty good.
Yeah, no, he's like his stuff is really good. He's probably the Protestant I trust the most, and he still thinks this is a very important issue. Like when he did his top reasons why he's not Catholic and top reasons he's not Eastern Orthodox, he put this in both. He's like, look, I'm Lutheran, we're very attached to our doctrine of justification, and yeah, no, and he still thinks it's a barrier, but no,
another thing now that you bring up the Orthodox, another thing that I find interesting is if it was just a matter of, people, the medievals, not having a proper understanding of justification because of the translation of the Latin, then how did they explain the Greek Orthodox? They maintained Greek. They didn't develop a declarative form of justification.
You can say they were wrong, but you can't say they were wrong because they didn't know the Greek. That's all they knew, right? The Church of Constantinople and all the other various Eastern patriarchates, where the liturgy and the scholarship was all in Greek. I don't know. Yeah, I brought that up in an article on my website a few years ago, and Ken Temple, who's a guy, he's on Twitter. He's a Protestant. A Calvinist who I've had dialogue with. He's a good guy. I posted that article, and he's kind of like, yeah, I've always kind of wondered that myself. And there were people in the medieval period who didn't know Greek. It was just less common. Like I'm talking about in the Latin Church. So
right. And to be fair, Thomas was someone who also, I don't think his Greek was that particularly strong.
No.
Although most of he cut his teeth mostly on but as a preacher, as a Dominican, he was part of the order of preachers. So he would have at least have been familiar enough with scripture where he could give commentary in the sense that he had to preach this stuff to people, and he had to be very intimate with scripture itself. So it's not like he's somebody who was altogether unfamiliar with scripture, but just somebody who you'd probably want to read twice by someone more professional, at the very least when you're looking at his own commentaries.
So I don't want to go too long on this stream. Like we're currently at 48 minutes. Maybe we'll go to an hour, maybe a bit more, and we may take some questions, but I don't want to go more than an hour and a half because these things can get too long. But and besides, this is just your first few weeks reading in. Like we're going to have you back on when you're more sharp. So a Catholic, if you're a Catholic who's not an expert in theology, where would you say to start research into this if you're pure green?
I really hate to sound like a doctrinaire Thomist because I'm not. But in all honesty, you're not terrible by starting off reading Thomas Aquinas on the Summa. Now, of course, the free copy on New Advent is fairly inaccessible for people who might not know the terms. But if you're somebody who's been catechized enough to know the basics, and you've probably read like an introduction to Thomas or a good intro book. I think Edward Fazer has a couple. One is The Last Superstition, which you could read up on, and the other is an introduction to Aquinas, where he touches on all 5 ways of the arguments.
I notice you're not plugging Taylor Marshall. Is there a reason for that? Ooh.
Well, so here's the thing. Taylor Marshall's kind of moved on from a lot of the Thomistic stuff. I think
he's crisis in the church now. That's all he is.
Yeah. No, this isn't. Now, to be fair, he still has some good articles you could look on his blog post. There's actually, funny enough, there's actually one where he defends Vatican II from the criticism that it says Muslims profess the faith of Abraham and they, alongside with us, adore one merciful God. I didn't use the because it's not in Lumen Gentium.
Because there's no articles in Latin.
Exactly. Now it's
the same with. I just want to add something. It's the same with all Slavic languages. So if you're on YouTube and there's a comment, and they're forgetting a bunch of articles, it's probably a Slav because Slavs don't have. And that's the reason why I should point out. I like me. I go to Latin Mass. The priests say that the Catholics from Slavic countries have a lot easier time learning Latin. Poles, Croats, Slovenians, etc. Czechs. They're a lot easier time learning that stuff.
Yes, I could have definitely imagined. Whereas I really like my articles, but in any
case, they have articles in Arabic.
Arabic isn't my first language. It's English. I'm thorough English. In fact, I have an easier time reading Old English than I do other languages. And it's not just because I like English. It's it's my first language. It's because it's easy for me to grab a hold of like all the nuances of the older English and just translate that stuff in my head. The same goes for French. Like I have an easier time when I see French on the screen. I have an easier time translating that, even if I need to use some external help, than I ever would Latin or Greek. It's just
Arabic
and Arabic. But just to go back, I read something by Marshall where he was defending Lumen Gentium, like in his earlier career. And what was funny is he brought up objections against Lumen Gentium that he would have brought up in the article. And now it seems like he's on the opposite side, but a lot of his earlier work seems to address his later work, which I find kind of funny. But I think it's just because he's so prolific that he probably forgot about the older stuff.
Well, that's true with Jay Dyer as well, because a lot of people don't know he was an Orthodox catechumen back in like 2006 for like 3 years, and then he decided to stay with the Catholic Church, and he wrote this whole article why he's like, yeah, I'm sticking with Rome. Here's why. Here's why the papacy is true, and so. So he probably Dyer refutes the new Dyer.
He probably got, I don't know, maybe he couldn't stop getting tired of getting high and reading the Fathers.
Yeah.
Okay, but
studies require a lot of weed.
It's true. Like theologians and weed just go together.
I mean, I must confess, I've not taken a single puff of weed in my entire life. I mean, perhaps that's the reason why I believe in absolute divine simplicity, maybe. So,
well, I really wish I could say I've never tried the devil's lettuce, but unfortunately, like when you're younger, sometimes you're peer pressured into it a little. And plus, there was a huge period where you're young and stupid. So
we've all sinned in the past.
Exactly.
Don't need to go into detail.
Right. Jay Dyer is a denominational schizo. That's true. Like at a certain point, you just pick a denomination and stick with it. Get really good, and if for some reason, if all else comes crumbling down, at the very least, we want to see that you're sticking to it, that you're trying to hold fast to it.
Okay, I'm putting a ban on that name. We're not saying that name until the end of the stream. I don't want him occupying
Okay.
my stream.
All right. All right.
Okay, there's a good point here by Five a Day Productions. Best works on continuity of Vatican II is one Thomas Pink's work on Dignitatis Humani, Father Aidan Nichols' Conciliar Octet. Just pause for a second there, Five a Day Productions. I know. I do got to ask Father Aidan Nichols, how old is that? Because he's kind of borderline rad trad now. Like I know he was one of the ones who accused Francis of heresy, right? Not saying he's wrong, but his theology is moving. So I'm saying, is that something he wrote in like 2006 or something, or is that some he's written since Francis is Pope? Well, I mean, I don't know. I've got a few of his books. Aiden Nichols, smart guy.
To be fair, one could agree that Vatican II was legit and still think Francis is, a little out there at times, or too. I'm being I'm being nice here. He's our Pope, so I will downplay this a bit.
All right, 5 a Day says that's before the letter. Like how much before? Like from what year? He wrote it before his recent shift. Interesting. It'd be interesting to see what his, but like I think you make a good point. You could still fully accept Vatican II and think Francis is off the rail. That's Tim Gordon's opinion, and I know you're a big admirer of Gordon. So am I.
Yeah, I mean. Yeah, his research is actually pretty good. I did like his point of emphasizing that there's a distinction between the spirit and the documents, and the spirit of the Second Vatican Council. Yeah, we can be very sketched out by it. Now he goes a little further than saying sketched out, but you get my point. And
yeah, no, and I do look forward to reading his book on Vatican II. Like he's got a book coming out on feminism. I don't need to read a book by Tim Gordon to know that feminism is a heap of trash. By the way, I was talking with a feminist I know today, and she said to read the book. I basically said, all right, what book should I read? And she says, Little Women. And I'm like, okay. And I looked it up. It's like 800 pages. I'm like, really? So anyway.
So I call myself a feminist because in today's culture, non-feminist means you hate women. And basically, feminist, I just take it to mean, in a very nominal sense, I don't hate women. Now, of course, I'm just also a feminist who also would say a lot of things like women who identify as feminists would hate me for. So, for example, I think that it was a huge mistake to allow so many women into the workforce. That's something I could definitely say and still say I don't hate women. And I'll identify as a feminist in that nominal sense, just to avoid crucifixion. And that's about it, because feminist is a little like, it's one of those words now that is absolutely meaningless. It just means I don't hate women.
It's like anti-Semitism. Like that word is completely useless now because of the ways it's been abused and twisted. And
if John Chrysostom can be put in the same camp as Adolf Hitler, then yeah, I do think that term has definitely lost its hold. Like, you could definitely be somebody who thinks that Jews as people are not evil, and at the same time think that they have a religion which is deficient of providing salvation, and can even be deleterious to Christians, because a lot of Christians have a terrible history of buying into this Judaized Christianity, which is just toxic and both communities end up hating it.
Yeah.
In fact, I have a rabbi friend. One of the things me and him agree on are how much we really dislike Messianic Jews. Basically, we get a kick. Basically, we laugh and say they're Baptist with yarmulkes. And actually, he's very funny. He once said that fundamentalist Christians and Orthodox Jews have one thing in common: they both think that a majority of Jews are going to hell.
Oh, well, just pause for a sec. I don't want to reveal your location, but there's Jews where you live?
No, he's not a friend IRL. He's actually a friend on the internet. We met
Oh,
on, yeah. We have a pretty long friendship. He's a rabbi in Israel. He's fought in the Israeli army. Um, like he's a very well-informed guy, very conservative, and he's somebody who's not afraid to say things which are politically incorrect, which even Jews themselves. If you look at his Facebook feed. Will complain about, and
who
then
is
he's
this
like,
rabbi?
"Yeah, I don't care." His name is Rabbi Gavriel Kostanov. He's somebody who I really respect, even though we disagree very much on certain issues. But I've I've talked to him a lot about like Old Testament violence and certain issues in the Old Testament, and yeah, we have a very amicable friendship. But we're also not ones to mince words when it comes to religious beliefs.
There was a. It's the first time I think I've ever said this on a live stream, but the about this time last year, there was an Orthodox Jew from Israel who is very studied. You know, he's very Torah observant. He sent me an email and he asked if I wanted to dialogue with him because he saw my blog and I do bring up Judaism occasionally, and we discuss, you know, like historic church, you know, anti-Semitism, supposed anti-Semitism. We talked about Hanukkah, and yeah, we discussed a few other things too. Smart guy. We haven't talked in about like 8 months or something, but no, smart guy. And yeah, I don't want to say his name because he's not an internet personality. He just sent me a private email, so I will say shout out to you. You know who you are. But yeah, no, like smart smart guy, and like of course he studied in the Talmud, which I'll fully confess I've not read at all. Except Perka Avot, but that's the Mishnah. Is the Mishnah part of the Talmud? I don't even know this. Like me, I know the Old Testament well. I'll say this, but in terms of Jewish writings, like authoritative writings outside the Bible, I'm not an expert. I read a book. I'm trying to see if I can find it there. If you want to say something now.
So, from my understanding, the oral law is basically consider like a textbook of traditions that accompanies the written law. The Mishnah Torah is basically the oral Torah. So if you want to understand it, it's basically a lot of commentary, not just on scripture, but also on the application of the Jewish law. And you had to write it when you were in exile because like a lot of legal issues came up. Like, how are you supposed to apply the law when you're not in Israel, where you don't have a temple? And how are you applying it in all these various circumstances? So, for example, do you save a life during the Sabbath? Like, it's a day of rest, but it's also a form of work. And of course, rabbis debated about that issue. One of the things that it says is because it says in another part that the purpose of the law is so that you may live. They say, okay, yeah, this is a point where you are supposed to save a life of somebody who is dying during the Sabbath. And funny enough, there are actually multiple schools in debate. So there's schools like the School of Heli and the School of Shema. And Halil and I'm getting the names mixed up. Halil and apparently they debated over issues like divorce, whether that was okay or not, saving the life of a Sabbath, and apparently even Jesus had positions which came down on either one side or another. So, for example, the School of Halil was very pro-divorce, but the other school was not. And Jesus, of course, takes the position that no, divorce is not acceptable. Shema, and he goes further than the strict school, which says it's not available in all cases except adultery, whereas Jesus says it's not available in any case. The only time adultery is mentioned is for like the two reasons we mention are if you read it in the original Aramaic, it just means something like porneum, just fornication, some kind of sexual immorality, and that could include incest. So, and another reason is adultery is something which gets you the death penalty. So there's no real reason to divorce someone you are already going to kill. So,
yeah. So just talk for 30 seconds. I gotta check if I can find this book. I'll be back.
no worries. I'll answer 5-A Productions question. All right. What do I think of E. Michael Jones? Well, a couple of things. One, I'm not exactly sold on his view of AIDS. I know it's a very contentious one, and that's not the sum total of his stuff. But yeah, I don't buy into the idea that it is just a conglomeration of effects that come with homosexuality. Like, if I'm not someone who's a medical expert myself, so I'm not going to condemn it in too harsh words, but like I've talked to this issue with not just my brother who's going through med school, but as well as another person I knew in the past, and I don't really think I could agree with that position on the AIDS virus. The second thing I would probably disagree with E. Michael Jones on is the idea that a Christian can't simultaneously identify as a Jew. I think you can identify as both. I don't like Paul himself even says that he was a Hebrew of Hebrews, something akin to that.
Yeah, and this is post Christ, right?
Right. But I will say this about E. Michael Jones. I think he is dead on the idea that people try to control us using our sexual appetites. I think that as somebody who has spent a long time battling his addiction to pornography, I cannot wholeheartedly agree more. It's disgusting how they use sexual images to anesthetize us, to not care about what goes on, to want things like abortion just because we don't want to care about our sexual consequences, to sell us and commercialize products. Like, it's gross and disgusting, and the fact that he draws it to things like the French Revolution is not surprising in the least. So I give him kudos for that much.
The Marquis de Sade, yeah.
Ugh.
So yeah, no. There's a channel I watch. I've not watched him in the last few months, but he's a Jew. He's a convert to Judaism. It's just called A Jewish Convert, and he recommended this book to be a Jew. Apparently, if you do an Orthodox conversion, it's required reading, and like it just talks about like the life of a Jew and how all the Torah laws apply to your life, and like it talks about the Torah law and like how it's carried out, and it's good. It's not going to tell you everything, but it's it's a good book if you want to know how an Orthodox Jew lives his life, how he eats his food, how he celebrates Sabbath, how he does holidays. This book is a good but yeah, no, you should go check the channel, the Jewish Convert.
Is he a convert to Catholicism?
No, he's a convert to Judaism. I don't know what he was before. I know he was a Christian of some sort, but I'm not sure what he was. He's from South Africa.
I see.
And he has since moved to Israel, and yeah, so yeah, he's interesting. I've commented on a few of his videos.
If I could also suggest another book, it would be the biography of Father James Bernstein, who is an Orthodox Christian, Eastern Orthodox Christian, and he's a convert from Judaism. He was a secular Jew growing up. And what's really interesting is in this book, he actually traces what happens to the early Jews who converted in the Middle East. And basically he says they became the Antiochian community, the Antiochian Orthodox community, which would also extend to the Malachite community too. So if you look at Lebanese history, like a lot of us have a Jewish background. It doesn't mean we're Jews. It just means like that's part of our ethnicity, just like we're part Phoenician, part Arab, part European. We're really a hodgepodge of all these different ethnicities boiled into one.
Okay, so we've been going an hour and 9 minutes. All right, are there any final questions on the topic of justification or anything else we've talked about? Judaism, maybe.
Hanukkah is an innovation. Well, yeah, as a modern, yeah, like in its more commercialized form today, yeah, it was a very minor festival in Christ's time.
There's an article that I wrote on Hanukkah. Oh, hey, Brian. And this was about how it changed. Like, for example, in the time of Christ, like it says in the Gospel of John, the Feast of Dedication. It's all about the temple. But like, if you go like 120 AD, there's no temple anymore, right? It's just so now you have to like, it's tough being thankful for the dedication of something you don't have anymore. So there's kind of a bait and switch. They got the candle miracle now. And because let's face it, they want to party. And I kind of draw the analogy with the Soviet Union. You have Russia, you have Orthodox Christians celebrating Christmas in January. You have Jews celebrating Hanukkah in December. Let's just do something on New Year's where we can still eat, drink, be merry, exchange gifts, but we're going to drop the religion, And so like I kind of use that as an analogy for what happened to Hanukkah. Okay, question. Have you read the works of Joseph de Maistre or Orestes Brownson? Who are your favorite Catholic political philosophers? Alan Fimister's word. All right, I'll tell you who it is. It's Joseph de Maistre. I love Joseph de Maistre. I've got a lot of his books on that shelf over there. I'm not going to go grab them, but I love Joseph de Maistre. I also love Louis de Bernal, René de Chateaubriand. Just brilliant. His memoirs, Chateaubriand's memoirs, and Cortez and Schlegel, and just brilliant. I love the counter-enlightenment because right now we need to expose that the Enlightenment is the emperor that has no clothes. The Enlightenment is failed, and it is becoming more obvious by the day. And we need to advert, because the counter-Enlightenment, people like Joseph de Maistre have been airbrushed from history. They talk about Voltaire and all these useless idiots who have done nothing but lead us down this dark path. All right, do you want to comment on that one?
Well, Hans Hermann Hoppe. I'm kidding. I'm not an anarcho-capitalist. Although, there is kind of a modicum of respect I have for that community because a friend of mine is a part of it. But in terms of my own political philosophy, it's not super formed right now. I do have Filmer's book alongside with Father Crane's book, Integralism. It's something I plan to get around to reading after this Justification stuff. But right. But at this point, I basically say my position is very Burkean. It's an Enlightenment conservative philosophy, unfortunately. And I'm only comfortable taking that position because that's the one I know how to defend. And now if I could go a little more radical reactionary, opposite side of the spectrum there, then I'll be happy to. But for now, my main defense is defend what I know. And if you want to go a little further back, read up on it. So I take the very precautious Burkean view at this point, and hopefully I can push back into a more reactionary viewpoint if Filmer and Crane's book do the trick.
Interesting. But me, I'm Mestre. So 5-A Productions, I'm Mestre. I'm as counter Enlightenment as you can get. I love all those guys. So if you want to know where I stand, and in fact, I got an article on my website, alanreal.com, called "No One Has Heard of My Favorite Philosopher," because just the mess, he just shreds freedom of speech and freedom of religion. Like, he just shreds them. He's like, it just like, there you go. It's done.
Although I'm not sure which French reactionary said this, but he said something along the lines of, when the liberals are in power, we appeal to freedom because that's their principle. But when we're in power, we don't let them appeal to that because that's not our principle. Which it kind of tells you that even conservatives today who have to take a position have to hold to freedom of speech and religion, not because it's an intrinsic value, but because at least the state we're in history, we can't afford to let an illiberal administration take that away from us. We have to, at the very least, keep things right of left or right of the right side of the liberal spectrum. And then push into a more reactionary camp. I don't think, I don't think just outright getting a Catholic integral society is going to happen without that or some drastic revolutionary action.
Okay, last call for questions, or I'll kill the stream, as they say. Any more questions about Joseph Demet? I see. There's a big debate. Do you pronounce the S?
Demet. I would pronounce the S.
Because I talked to a girl I know, a native French speaker. She's from Morocco, and she just says maître. She's like, "Oh, it's maître," and I'm like, "Okay, that's what I thought." And I've had other people say maître, but I've had other people say mestre.
Well,
Yeah.
Another thing is if she's a continental French speaker and you're speaking in like a Quebec French accent or were trained in it, then chances are you might just be deferring to that.
Yeah, because she grew up in Morocco until she was 18. Then she moved to Paris to go to university, and then she moved to Canada.
If there's one thing Parisians seem to hate, it's Quebec accents. They're super snooty about it.
Yeah, no, but yeah, no. Well, they're snooty about it.
They're snooty in general.
Have you ever heard Swiss French?
I have not. No. Have you ever heard of Acadian French?
I mean, I've been to Acadia and I spoke French there, so I guess I did. But this was in 2001.
No, I had no idea.
Yeah. All right. Is a modern counter-revolution possible without resorting to means that aren't just passive? Most conservative just get rolled over by liberals who are willing to take much more tangible actions. Okay, I don't want to couch this in a conservative versus liberal, because ultimately I think they're two sides of the same coin. This is my opinion. Perhaps John has his own opinion.
I'm not going to fight with a guy on his own stream. Don't worry, man.
No, you can throw out your opinion,
All right.
we do. But what we should do is try to be Catholic in all things. Because look, although I'm Canadian, John is too. If I lived in the States, I would have voted for Trump. But at the same time, I know there's things about Trump that aren't Catholic. He's just more Catholic than Joe Biden. Like he's the more Catholic pick. But like I'm not going to lie, he believes stuff and practice stuff that is against the Catholic faith,
I would definitely say that part of taking these steps to getting a more Catholic society is to work locally. Like, I think we've bought into a lot of globalistic thinking by saying it all has to be top down, when in reality, like, as someone who's involved in his own community, you could probably do much more as an alderman, getting involved, bringing about Catholic social policies, social teaching, supporting Catholic businesses, heck, even supporting co-ops, stuff that's homegrown in your community rather than shipping that stuff outside of your state or outside of your province or outside of your country. Get stuff done locally first and then try to move stuff upscale. Like, I think if we start there and start focusing more on local politics, I think that's probably the best place to start. On top of that, I'd also suggest doing something along the lines of decentralizing power. Right now, the best thing you can do is make sure power is less concentrated in the hands of your federal governments and try to bring it insofar as to the local levels. Again, Catholic teaching is about subsidiarity. Get stuff done on the local levels first and only move it up if absolutely necessary.
Yeah, and promote as much counter-enlightenment literature as possible. No one's heard of Mestre. No one's heard of Louis de Bonheur, René de Chateaubriand, Juan Donoso Cortez, Schlegel. No one's heard of these people. So, as 5-A Productions said, promote, or what me taken away from his, promote as much counter-enlightenment as possible. Because the Enlightenment, because as long as we're working with that framework, and Enlightenment actually is the bastard son of Protestantism, but that's a whole nother debate. Like I think if the church had gone an extra 100 years without the Reformation, we'd have gone straight to the French Revolution. I think.
What's funny is if the Enlightenment is the bastard son of the Protestants, and the Protestants are dissident brothers, then that would make the Enlightenment our bastard nephews. Uh, sorry. Uh, and by the way, the whole dissident and separated brothers thing that actually goes back to Pope Leo the 13th. But in any case, I also just want to include one more thing. We fund public education, especially universities, and there's actually a really good book by an American author, Brian Kaplan, who's an anarcho-capitalist, but he actually makes some terrific arguments against university education. Uh, Basically, it is mostly a scam. They usually sell it on a more informed population, and they usually try to sell it on saying, oh, it's going to mean your population has more social capital. That means they're more able to do things that they need to function the economy. But in truth, most of
Stupid.
that stuff, it's stupid. Most of that stuff that you learn in university is signaling things. It's about signaling intelligence, not actually being intelligent. It's about signaling your ability to conform, just to do mundane tasks that are repetitive day to day, and just to make sure that you toe the line when it comes to what you're supposed to do, and follow a plan like everybody else. And it also measures your ability to just do tedious tasks over and over again. That's mostly what it is. Like, think about it like this: a lot of the times you can a lot of the times, how many times in university have you slept through a course? Not because you a lot. Sometimes you don't even think it's absolutely necessary to attend the course. That you could just get caught up maybe by reading the textbook or something. That's
Hmm.
not something you would think about doing. Kaplan has a lot of lectures on this as well on YouTube. But The Myth Against Education is probably a really good book you could get for furthering arguments against the educational system at a university level. In all honesty, we would still be better off as an economy if it was up to the businesses you hire to give you apprenticeships and internships. Unless you're doing something like law or a very specialized field, most of the time it's not going to help having a university education.
Do do you have a degree
I have two. I can speak from
in
personal
what?
experience. I
If
have
you don't mind me asking. And
I have a bachelor of arts in sociology and in English, and also I've studied cultural studies, which is basically a lot of postmodern philosophy. So I know that intimately well. And I also minored in religious studies, and I have a master's degree in religious studies and cultural, and yeah, in religious studies as well. But that's mostly from religion as a social science, not from like comparative world religions or theology.
are you comfortable? It's okay if you're not. Are you comfortable saying what university they're from?
I am not. No, I'll
Okay,
tell you off air.
sure. Yeah,
Although
me.
you have, I'll tell you this much: you have heard of one of these from the news. Uh, so that's going to be your hint.
Okay. Me. I'll just say I took engineering, and like the thing that's so depressing about this at the end of the day, like I took engineering, University of Alberta. I can name my alma mater. But the problem, it's so depressing because you get a job, and it's like, oh, I'm like my whole job is using the Bernoulli equation. It's so depressing. You learn all this stuff, and you only use about 2% of it.
Hmm.
So, um,
Yeah,
are, okay.
yeah.
Are there any more questions? Because I don't want to get this going too long. All right, I'm going to wrap it up here. So, John, is there anything you want to say before I kill the stream?
Just to address 5 days question. In terms of homeschooling, if you could send your kids if you could homeschool, I would suggest that. If, however, you cannot, I would just instruct you to remember the words of Archbishop Fulton Sheen, who said, um, children who go off to Catholic schools often can give up the faith, but children who go to public schools often have to learn to fight for the faith. If you're going to send your kid off to a public school, make sure they have the tools to fight for the faith. If you have a kid if you're like me, sometimes you're going to have a kid who doesn't buy into it and is willing just to be a contrarian. If you have that kind of kid, Yeah, they're going to need the tools of the Catholic faith just to be contrarian. Trust me.
And promote and get Mestre in them as young as possible. Like me, like I just learned who that guy was a few years ago. Me. And I'm not going to tell you my age, but why not? I'm 34. There you go. You know how old I am. But Mestre, just get as much mess and get them addicted to the counter Enlightenment. Because at the end of the day, we need to unseat the Enlightenment. The Enlightenment is the endarkenment, as Chesterton said. I think that was Chesterton. But whoever said the Enlightenment was the endarkenment is bang on. We need to read as much Mestre. Screw Voltaire. Screw all these. I'm not going to say the words because the words I have for them are very inappropriate. But guys, read as much Mestre, read de Bonald, René de Chateaubriand, Joseph de Maistre. Just read as much of these people as possible. Their stuff's hard to get. A lot of it's still in French, which is fine if you can speak French, but most Americans can't. But a lot of it's in English still. Like his critique of the French Revolution is in English. Spanish Inquisition in English. His book on the papacy is in English.
Wasn't he an ultramontanist?
I didn't get that impression by reading his book.
Fair enough. Sorry to interrupt.
Well, no, that's a good point. But like, I don't think like he's very solid. In fact, I heard a Protestant say once he invented papal infallibility because he wrote about 50 years prior to Vatican I. But no, he certainly but no, his book on all of his stuff is so good. Read as much. The moral of the story is works are part of justification, and read as much Mestre as possible. I'm going to kill the stream. God bless you all. We will be back before you know it. I'm going to have John back. We're also going to have Father James back. Maybe have a debate between the two on justification or something else. You never know.
Right now, he's not really certain of his own view of justification. So, yeah, he's still trying to work that out. He's not developed any systematic approach to it.
Okay. All right. I'm going to kill the stream. God bless you all and have a good night. Have a good weekend.